Some days ago, I randomly decided it was time to find some other content creators on YouTube for Arena of the Planeswalkers. So I typed in Arena of the Planeswalkers tier list, seeing what other people thought of the game. You'll be shocked what I found. Or what I didn't find. Pretty much everything were like, knockoffs of AOTP, Magic Spell Slingers, the Magic the card game. Things that, honestly, they're all just inferior to AOTP. Shout out to Two Bats Gaming here, though. He actually had an AOTP Strongest Color video. He doesn't look like he's active anymore, though. But other than his video, I pretty much found nothing talking about like the power of AOTP cards. So I thought, it's my turn to contribute to this masterpiece of a game. Welcome to a 5-piece series where I am going to be reviewing all 5 of AOTP colors in depth and giving you my thoughts on how powerful I personally believe each color is. One big point for me to make before I continue, in general, I think AOTP is quite akin to chess in that you want to do a lot to protect your Planeswalker, who's effectively your king. So, when I'm reviewing spells and army cards, I generally rank them higher if 1. They're capable of dealing direct damage to figures in general, which includes creatures and planeswalkers. Number 2, if they are capable of healing planeswalkers. And number 3, if they make it easier for your key figures to deliver game-winning attacks against hero figures and especially against planeswalkers. Number 4, cards that are dead in hand when you're playing against a heroes-only army will generally be ranked lower due to my own personal belief that the heroes-only armies seem actually quite strong and viable for the AOTP meta. Most of my positions are based on a standard 1v1 or potentially a 2v2 game of AOTP where the goal is either to kill the enemy planeswalker or to wipe out their entire army. I'm not going to typically consider things like capture the flag or odd kinds of, victory conditions. I'm mostly thinking 1v1 on like a Heroescape or an AOTP map where, it's like a tournament game and you're just trying to kill the other guy. So, now that we've laid out the general guidelines for how I like to rank these cards, let's move on to the meat of this video. Red. In the Magic the Gathering, the card game, the theme of red appears to be chaos, impulse, freedom, fury, action, purpose, emotion, passion, and individualism. Before we review the individual spell cards and army cards of red, I'm going to review what I believe are the general strengths and weaknesses of red as a whole. Without further ado, the strengths of red. Number 1, and easily red's number 1, red has an insane arsenal of ways to deal direct damage, raise their power, and increase the quantity of attacks that they are executing. Red is nearly a one-trick pony in this regard. Check out this list of spells and abilities in which they buff power, deal true damage, or grant extra attacks. We have Burn at the Stake, Chandra's Outrage, Incinerate, Power of Fire, Fire Breathing, Stoke the Flames, Twin Flame, Sure Strike, Superheated, Haste, and the list goes way on even past that. At a quick glance, it appears that about 2/3 of Red's spells and abilities are attempting to deal true damage or increase Red's capacity to deal damage via attacks. And number 3, Red has decent mobility. Although their creatures suffer from being range 1, just like White and Black, Red's creatures have a slightly better time getting around the battlefield. The Blazing Firecats, Flamewing Phoenixes, and Bloodlight Nobles all have pretty good base move, whilst red spells like Goblin Warpaint, Seize the Day, Rush of Adrenaline, Sure Strike, and Stubborn Resilience all support further mobility. Although proper and optimal use of these spells can be tricky because they do not grant disengage, and there are some just really odd requirements to even playing some of these spells to begin with. On to the weaknesses of red. Number 1. Red is the glass cannon color, no defense Nelly. Red squad creatures tend to have low life and or low toughness, and red as a color offers no healing nor toughness buffs other than Stubborn Resilience, which requires most of a squad be destroyed first anyway. so they do not tend to hold up well while under fire. Red is like green in this regard. They will likely only have a few killer turns or opportunities in the game to make a big push or execute a crucial play, but red lacks the healing and range that green offers. So in my opinion, there is less leeway and more pressure on red to really fish for those positions and turns where they can burn the opposition to ashes. Weakness number 2, as briefly mentioned before, red is heavy-handed with the range 1 creatures. Although this is a tad alleviated due to the general higher mobility of red creatures, but also because all of the red planeswalkers have some range, which is a nice perk. Still, their creatures' low survivability and the color's lack of disengage can make it rather tough for red creatures to simply walk up and attack the juiciest target if enemy creatures are positioned well or already engaged with red's creatures. To combine this point with weakness number 1, the high reliance on range 1 figures and their lower survivability means that red needs to destroy the most powerful threats ASAP, and luckily offense is this color's motto. On to red's general ranking. As you'll see here, I've placed them at number 4 on my tier list. I think red pretty closely vies for that number 3 spot against the White Heroes build, because I think one of the greater weaknesses of the White Heroes builds is that they are weaker to attack dice compared to spells, and red loves to toss powerful attack dice. So it's a pretty close call, but I think White's heroes are just a bit better than Red's squads, especially for the matchups versus Black squads and White squads down below. So let's burn through my reviews of the spell cards and army cards of Red, and I'll explain why I think Red belongs in the number 4 spot. And oh boy, do we have a very special card at the very bottom of Red spells. One that I think is the worst spell in the entire game. Harness the Storm, 20 pointer from Shadows over Innistrad. This is a card that has way too much ask in return for way too much potential of friendly fire. First, you have to destroy a creature in combat, then you have to discard 2 cards from your hand, which is completely insane. Not only is that 1/6 of your spell card deck, but is also draining your precious hand where red does not generate any additional card draw. If you remember my rant on Black's Behold the Beyond, then you should already understand that I'm not a fan of self-inflicted discard. And if you haven't watched my Black tier list video, go watch it now. After you've jumped through the ridiculous hoops of killing a creature in combat and then discarding 2 cards, you get this excellent effect of dealing 1 damage to every creature. And don't forget, this includes your own creatures as well as your teammates' creatures if you're playing a 2v2 game. All these creatures within 3 spaces of your Planeswalker. It's such an atrocious card. The only real uses for this card are A, Fire Starter for your IRL fire. I mean, come on man, it's literally a red card. Or B, an AotP themed lie detector test, where you play this card with full sincerity and then ask your opponent if he would play it in the same situation. If he doesn't laugh loudly in your face and correct your blatant error, you'll know he's full of shit and not being honest about your best interests. Let's move on to another top tier contender for the worst spell in the game, Infernal Plunge, 20 pointer from Shadows over Innistrad. This one, as I mentioned, is hardly a step up from Harness the Storm. This card is the physical manifestation of what a desperate attempt to bring back a lost game would look like, except it also shoots you in the foot at the same time. The only red squad with more than 2 life is the Goblin Javeliers, and YOLOing one of your Javeliers would effectively cost you the 20 points for this spell, as well as the 33 point cost of the figure that you killed, all to do just 3 points of damage to an enemy creature. For what little it is worth, this card does synergize quite well with Arlen's Archmage's Assault, because Archmage's Assault just requires that a creature be destroyed this turn, and then Archmage's Assault allows you to put a damage on a figure within 7 spaces of Arlinn, and Planeswalkers fall under the umbrella of figures, so when you decide to destroy your own figure with Infernal Plunge, you could also potentially put a damage on your enemy's Planeswalker as well. Outside of the synergy with Arlinn, I feel that in nearly every other scenario, you would be better off taking Red's Dual Shot or Incinerate instead of this 20-point scam. Keep your squads alive and on the field as bodyguards and offensive forces that you need them to be, instead of trying to be black but crappier in every way. To put it in perspective, Black's Bone Splinters cost 10 points, deals a flat 4 damage, and they have 2 kinds of low-cost, self-regenerating creatures in the Restless Zombies and the Skurzdak Cultists, and they even have a spell that straight up regenerates one of their figures onto the battlefield. So they don't typically care about killing their own. Infernal Plunge is another good IRL fire starter if you need to heat up your house. Just saying. Next garbage spell from Red. Rolling Trembler, 5-pointer from Shadows over Innistrad. This one is nearly total cringe. I honestly feel bad that I had to rank cards even below this one, but at least this one costs 5 points, and in my opinion, this has legitimate use in like a true damage spam red-green Arlinn deck that focuses on assassinating an enemy planeswalker with a mix of spell and ability damage. Outside of that build, this card just sucks in a 1v1 environment and is mediocre still even in a 2v2 environment. Use Rolling Trembler with the previous 2 crappy red spell cards if you want to intentionally throw a game while playing against your little nephew. Moving on, Stensia Masquerade, 10-pointer from Shadows over Innistrad. Dealing 1 guaranteed damage to your own squad creature in order for each of your attack dice to statistically have a 1/6 higher chance to roll a hit doesn't feel like it's worth it. I mean, do I have this logic right? It feels very weak. In my opinion, it seems like you would want to convert at least 2 blanks into hits in order for this card to actually get positive value, because otherwise you're basically just doing a 1-for-1, one wound on my figure in order to deal 1 wound to your figure. I attempted to do the math with a dice probability calculator, and even when I was rolling 6 attack dice, I was under the impression that I only had a 67% chance that at least 1 blank showed up. And there's always a chance that my math is wrong. I'm not super wise with probabilities, but that rather generous calculation of rolling 6 attack dice just makes Stensia Masquerade look really bad in my opinion. I would honestly rather just use Red's Pyroclasm in my deck before I would use Stensia Masquerade. Red's Pyroclasm has the same effect of dealing 1 damage to my creature, sure, but it also has guaranteed output as well as a decent chance to hit multiple enemy figures, including planeswalkers not named Obnixilis. My gut says that Stensia Masquerade's use probably best lies with either the Kessigs or Seize the Day because of the double attack effect, but even that seems super niche and still barely worth the effort to set up. Alright, I think we are officially out of the woods with the crappy red spells. Sure Strike, 25-pointer from Battle for Zendikar. This one is pretty expensive, and it requires a creature to be destroyed in combat for us to even play it. So this means destroying stuff via spells or abilities won't fulfill this requirement. I suppose, as a special note, you could destroy your own creature in combat to satisfy the requirement for Sure Strike. Like, if you have Sure Strike in your hand on your first or even second turn, you could just go and destroy one of your own 1 life, 1 toughness Flamewing Phoenixes, and then later on in that turn play Sure Strike, but that just feels really inefficient, honestly. And frankly, I would rather just use Power of Fire and or Fire Breathing in my deck before I would ever use Sure Strike, because I can play those 2 cards on demand without having to kill something in combat ahead of time. Perhaps one day I'll get itchy and play a deck that contains all 3 of these cards in it just to see how it goes, but that's not high on my AOTP bucket list. Up next, we have Dissension in the Ranks, a 15-point card from Shadows over Innistrad. Not only is this card an enemy-only squad card, but in my opinion this one can be pretty tough to successfully use against red, black, and white because you can't move with the target squad creature first. And range 1 creatures will often have the lowest number of legal targets available for attacking. Although white has a tendency to be very close to one another in like the Rocks Veterans or even the Core Hookmasters who do have a range of 3, so with white it can be a little less problematic to get this card to successfully fire. And luckily for red, this card is generally better when there are enemy range squaddies, such as blue's Illusionary Projections or green's Elf Rangers, since ranged figures are going to have a much wider target selection than a range 1 figure. But as usual, this card's utter incapability to do anything against a heroes only build knocks this one pretty low in my opinion. Moving on, we have Burn From Within, a 20-point card from Shadows over Innistrad. And here's another squad hatred card that is useless against hero builds. However, this one actually combos pretty nicely with Red's Malevolent Whispers because you can place Burn From Within on an enemy squad and then use Malevolent Whispers against that enemy squad and trigger Burn From Within by moving that squad creature. As long as there is at least one enemy squad to enchant with this card, I generally think it's a decent card, but it falls off a bit if you draw it too late into the game, because oftentimes in the late game there are only partial squads remaining, which means this card is dealing less damage. In general, I would prefer to have either Incinerate or Dual Shot in my deck over Burn From Within, though. Nahiri's Machinations, 10-pointer from Shadows over Innistrad. Honestly, I don't know what's up with these kill a creature in combat first conditions, but seriously, getting +1 power only while attacking adjacent creatures feels like such a poor reward, especially when all of Red's Planeswalkers have the option to fight at range instead of having to become engaged. And don't get me wrong, this card is probably decent enough for Nahiri or Arlinn in wolf form. I just don't understand why they have to have these silly conditions when we already have something like Chandra's Fury in red, which costs exactly the same as this card and has no silly prerequisites to actually playing it. Anyway, my rage aside, in a 2v2 game, this card can be pretty decent if you have a teammate, such as Gideon, Sorin, or Obnixilis, because you could play this on your teammate on a turn where you killed a creature in combat. And in my opinion, Sorin 100% appreciates any kind of power buffs, because he will go on a killing spree and continually heal off damage when he gets enough power. But in general, this card doesn't seem like anything worth writing home about. Coming up next, we have Flames of the Firebrand, 10-point card from the first Arena of Planeswalkers set. I'm pretty on the fence with Flames of the Firebrand. It can hit hero creatures if needed, but if you have 2 or even more enemy creatures within 2 spaces of your Planeswalker, I feel like the game might not be going so well for you. For 10 points, even settling for doing a single point of damage to a single creature doesn't feel completely atrocious for this card. Although with Chandra, you're honestly better off just discarding Flames of the Firebrand to use Superheated from a longer distance in that situation. But honestly, if you're looking to deal direct damage to creatures, I think there are better red cards than this one. Up next is Goblin Warpaint, 10-pointer from Battle for Zendikar. This one might be a sleeper card. I really haven't used it much. The requirement of destroying a creature this turn is annoying. However, keep in mind that this includes when you destroy your own creatures via things like Pyroclasm or Infernal Plunge, so there is some synergy to be had here. Additionally, the ability to summon one of Red's haste creatures and potentially get a kill in combat, and then before your action 3 move, play Goblin Warpaint is pretty novel in just the ability to move your creatures ahead and engage certain other figures all during your Planeswalker's turn. And even if you still need to use your regular Action 3 move and Action 4 attack before you actually kill a creature, the ability to move your entire squad 4 spaces seems like a nice way to get a jump on whatever your next turn's target will be. Or you can perhaps multi-engage and lock down your opponent's Planeswalker, or you can even take over a glyph all on the same turn. My final judgment, this card is seemingly not too powerful, but quite alright at the price of 10. So we are approximately in the middle of the pack. Malevolent Whispers, 20 points from Shadows over Innistrad. You should already know why I find this to be a middling card at best. Say it with me, useless against hero armies. It's pretty similar to Blue's Mind Control, with the shorter social distancing range, as well as the opposing creature getting +1 power until the end of turn. So this does give it some slight anti-synergy with things like Green's Rapid Withdrawal or Green's Rapid Bite, if we are mixing and matching green and red with Arlinn. But Malevolent Whispers also has direct anti-synergy with the Bloodline Noble's Arrogant Strike ability. I will mention one of its greatest synergies again, with Burn From Within. When you place Burn From Within on an enemy squad, and then cause that squad to move via Malevolent Whispers, you can guarantee to get Burn From Within's payout and attack your opponent with his own creature. It's a pretty good combo, as long as there's a squad to use it on. Alright, on to the next one. Rush of Adrenaline, 5-pointer from Shadows over Innistrad. I'll be the first to admit that the self-damage aspect of this really does suck, but I place it this high because of its 5-point cost and its guaranteed payout of being able to move your figure 4 spaces. The primary synergy I'm going to cite is one with the Eldrazi Ruiner's Lash of Tentacles. If your Eldrazi Ruiner is already on the field at the start of your turn, and you play Rush of Adrenaline between your actions 1 and 2 to move him, this gives you the ability to reposition him, potentially to get adjacent to a bunch of enemy creatures, so that when you do select him at your action 2 to begin his turn, his Lash of Tentacles ability will immediately deal optimal damage to all of those adjacent creatures. But as a final note for Rush of Adrenaline, I do think that the 4 additional movement is just very nice, because it's hard to find good additional move in AOTP, and I believe there is good surprise factor in being able to move one of your creatures 4 spaces. But due to the self-damage aspect of this card, I feel like I would only highly recommend this card for when you're using a Nahiri build with White's healing cards, and maybe you are fielding the Eldrazi Ruiner to spam healing on him and get him moving around the battlefield. Outside of that, this card is probably average at best. Coming up now is Burn at the Stake, 10-point card from Shadows over Innistrad. While mostly only having theorized the uses of this card, I do strongly believe it is better than most people think it is at first glance. It buffs all figures you control, including things like your own Planeswalker, as well as your creature's haste attacks, and haste attacks are pretty hard to modify. It's unfortunate that a Planeswalker cannot be declared because a Planeswalker is not a creature at all, and therefore is not a creature type, but this card is just one more power boosting option that can be used to assist Red in bursting down the annoying white heroes. And its synergy with Seize the Day as well as Chandra's double attack are very nice. The more attacks that you can stack from the figures you control in a turn where you play Burn at the Stake, the better. Getting up to some good stuff now. Dual Shot, 20-pointer from Shadows over Innistrad. 2 damage is enough to destroy a few squaddies who have 2 life, such as the Malakir Blood Chasers, Illusionary Projections, the Eldrazi Scions, and the Bloodline Nobles. But Dual Shot is also nice because it can be used to hit a hero creature if you really need it to. However, this card can be awkward to play because of its pretty stringent requirements of hitting something between 7 and 9 spaces away from your Planeswalker. And most creatures are going to be attempting to close in on your Planeswalker, and all of Red's Planeswalkers, bar Arlinn, can't even shoot any figures at 7 range or greater, so I feel like Dual Shot might be best used with Arlinn builds. Still, you get a pretty decent bang for your buck here. It's a good card. Next is Incinerate, 25-pointer from the first Arena of Planeswalkers set. Kind of the antithesis of Dual Shot, Incinerate can only deal damage when a creature is directly next to your Planeswalker. Incinerate can insta-kill most squad creatures in AOTP, or deal a massive chunk of damage against a hero creature. Makes it pretty good for its cost, honestly. Incinerate plus dual casting will make your opponent regret ever sending their creatures near your Planeswalker. And speaking of dual casting, here it is, right now. 45-pointer from Arena of Planeswalkers set. This one frankly has a disgusting price of 45 points. The concept of casting a spell 2 times in one turn is great, especially with like the aforementioned Incinerate or Dual Shot. But the problem with this is that this uses up all 3 of your spell plays for one turn. Keep in mind about how dual casting works. Let's say you play Twin Flame first, and then you play dual casting. And then dual casting allows you to play Twin Flame again. So now you've played 3 cards and you cannot play any more spells for the turn. In my opinion, Twin Flame and Seize the Day, which are 2 of Red's best spells, are probably often the best targets for dual casting. I personally prefer to play Twin Flame and Seize the Day on the same turn to get awesome effects from those 2 cards, and therefore that line of play is incompatible with dual casting. But dual casting can sort of fill in the gap if you double up on one of those 2 spells in case the other one was sent to the graveyard by, say, something like one of blue or black's spell destruction effects, or if you were drunk enough to include Harness the Storm in your deck and you actually decided to use it, and you followed up that poor decision with discarding one of either Twin Flame or Seize the Day. It's just, please, if you're watching my video, never do that, or I will disown you. And if you have kids, my AOTP senses will tingle and I will call CPS on you, and I will explain to them in great detail about how you are mentally incapable of raising a reasonable child. Okay, my Patriot rant over. I do think that the best targets for dual casting are, and maybe even in descending order, Twin Flame, Seize the Day, Incinerate, Dual Shot, and Malevolent Whispers. However, there are definitely times where a double play of Pyroclasm or Circle of Flame are warranted, especially if you can use it to drill additional damage into an enemy Planeswalker. It's honestly a very nice card, but the prohibitive cost really makes it mid-tier at best, in my opinion. Up next is Stubborn Resilience, 30-pointer from Battle for Zendikar. This one might be a hot take, pun intended, because Stubborn Resilience is pretty expensive at 30 points, and it can only be played on a squad with 1 figure remaining, but I think this spell is pretty good mostly because of how great it is with a few army cards in particular. The Keswick Rangers, the Blazing Firecats, and to a slightly lesser extent the Flamewing Phoenixes and Eldrazi Scions. A single Keswick Ranger still has access to his potent Hunt at Dawn and Dusk double attack, even if only one of them remains, while a single Blazing Firecat will have an insanely high move and then still be able to do a lot of damage thanks to his intense strike. And the Phoenixes / Scions can both slowly rebirth back to full squad strength while retaining the buffs of Stubborn Resilience, although in order to rebirth the Scions you would have to bring the Eldrazi Ruiner in your army, as well as take turns with the Ruiner to actually have the option to bring them back via his Shepherd of Scions. But I'm not sure if I would make the Phoenixes or the Scions a core win condition of my army out of the gate. That strategy feels just a bit too slow for the rather fast-paced AOTP environment. But it could work as a late game gambit when a lot of figures are dead or weakened and spells have been used up and they're not available anymore. But all of that aside, if you've watched my other tier list videos, you should already have a pretty good understanding that each color has a pretty decent number of ways to remove squads and or their enchantments from play. So while I do like Stubborn Resilience a lot in the right circumstances, I think I can admit that it might be too high at this spot. On to the next hot thing, Chandra's Outrage, 5-pointer from Arena of Planeswalkers set. This one's a pretty good 5-point card if you're looking for something to slide in your deck and get you some easy chip damage on a creature. This card is shockingly similar to Red's Circle of Flame, but there are 2 primary differences. So number 1 here, Chandra's Outrage cannot hit a Planeswalker, and in my opinion it is weaker for that. But Chandra's Outrage also does not require for your figure to be damaged. So it's effectively an easier condition to get the payout, but with a lower ceiling for that payout because it cannot hit a Planeswalker. But all in all, this is an easy 5-point card for most red builds if you have any remote intention of dealing with an enemy creature. Up next is Pyroclasm, 10-point card from the first Arena of Planeswalkers set. Pyroclasm has the drawbacks of both damaging your own red creature and dealing damage to any creatures that you might control without flying that are next to your first red creature. But considering how Red's Firecats are quite mobile and the Flamewing Phoenixes have flying, further friendly collateral damage seems mostly avoidable, Just use Pyroclasm after you have moved and attacked, so you can easily plan for the situation. Also, the double-spaced Firecats are some pretty decent targets for Pyroclasm because they can be adjacent to more figures at once compared to the other single-spaced red figures. Similar to Black's Bone Splinters, this card can be Red's going away gift after you have already moved and attacked with a red creature that you already intend to target with Pyroclasm anyway. Keep in mind the potential synergy with Circle of Flame, Chandra's Outrage, and other openings to follow up with cards such as Goblin Warpaint or even Stubborn Resilience for when you do end up killing your own creature with Pyroclasm's self-damage effect. Notably, Obnixilis is the only Planeswalker that is immune to the damage of the spell, so keep an eye out for opportunities to damage any non-Obnixilis Planeswalker with this card. It's a pretty good card for 10 points. Next up on the list is Chandra's Fury, 10-pointer from the original Arena of Planeswalkers set. Given that all of the red Planeswalkers have the option to shoot enemy figures from range, I feel like it's very hard to go wrong by putting this card in your deck. It is absolutely usable by Nahiri and Arlene while she's in human form, but it most strongly benefits Chandra due to her double attack. So where Nahiri and Arlene would only roll one additional die per turn by enchanting themselves with Chandra's Fury, Chandra will be rolling effectively 2 additional dice per turn because she can attack twice per turn. So on that note, I would 100% put this in every single Chandra build. It's not like she has many other options anyway, unlike Nahiri and Arlene. But 10 points in the end for a buff on your core Planeswalker unit is hard to pass up. Pretty good card. Up now is Circle of Flame, 5-pointer from the original Arena of Planeswalkers set. Cards that deal true damage to figures, which includes Planeswalkers, are pretty tough to find in AOTP, especially at the insane value of 5 points. The conditions required to fire this one off are a bit of a drag, but they should be relatively easy to meet for most red builds because of red's sheer reliance on range 1 creatures anyway. But this card specifically has a lot of combo potential with Pyroclasm, because due to the self-damage aspect of Pyroclasm, it actually sets you up to use Circle of Flame, given Pyroclasm didn't kill your creature to begin with. So this is a pretty threatening combo if you can get one of your creatures adjacent to an opposing Planeswalker, play Pyroclasm, deal 1 damage to your creature, to the enemy Planeswalker, as well as to any other creatures around, and then follow that up with Circle of Flame to deal an additional point of damage to that Planeswalker. Now I'd imagine over the span of like 5 or 10 games, you probably don't get this combo to work every single game, and honestly, excluding the potential to hit an opposing Planeswalker with Circle of Flame, it's basically a slightly worse Chandra's Outrage. But this is not a bad card. At 5 points, you should not have a hard time finding at least one opportunity to use it, even if you have to use it to target a creature. Next card, Senseless Rage, 20-pointer from Shadows over Innistrad. This is a very flexible card that we're dealing with here. So, first of all, this one sets a very odd precedent in that it allows you to roll the attack dice for an opposing figure, which, to my knowledge, you will not find anywhere else in AOTP, not in any official Heroescape, and not in any of the custom Heroescape, although I may be wrong on that note. But look at what we're dealing with here. So we have an enchant unique hero or unique squad, which allows you to reroll the attack dice for the enchanted figure after seeing the defending player's roll. So if you drop this card on an opposing Eldrazi Ruiner, and then that Ruiner comes up and attacks your Planeswalker, and let's say he rolls 6 attack dice and gets 6 crossed swords, you roll your defense and you get 2 shields. After seeing your own defending roll, you may announce that, via Senseless Rage, you are going to re-roll the attack dice for the enchanted Eldrazi, and with any luck, you'll roll less hits than what your opponent just did. So while Senseless Rage definitely has a lot of offensive applications, especially when you can combine with things like Fire Breathing or Twin Flame to ensure that you're maximizing the number of cross swords you roll, you can also use it defensively if you have no creatures left and you need something to help you fight your opponent's remaining creatures. This can be used to give you an edge in that fight if your Planeswalker is the last figure remaining. So given this sheer versatility that we have here, I think it's very hard to go wrong with including this card in your deck. Next in line, Stoke the Flames, 15-pointer from original Arena of Planeswalkers set. This card is literally Heroescape's Taillord turned into a spell. A 4-space aura of +1 power makes it extremely dangerous for enemies to end their turn near your red Planeswalker while you still have creatures in play or haste creatures in your reserve. Being one of only a few cards that can positively modify your creature's haste attacks makes this card very strong for red especially. Arlinn can also make excellent use of this card due to her access to the Kessig Rangers and the Elf Rangers, who have good range, which should enable them to remain in this aura consistently and give them the ability to pick off targets of choice, especially with things like Snare the Skies to buff their range. Stoke the Flames is absolutely a staple red card. Be sure that you use this. Now we're getting into one of what I call the Fantastic Four red spells, Power of Fire, 20-pointer from the original Arena of Planeswalkers set. I tend to joke about how red is kind of the brain-dead color, that there's just nothing to this color other than brute force, but I think Power of Fire kind of sums up red as a whole. You literally just play this card and you roll extra attack dice, and there's nothing else to it. +1 power is universally appreciated by all squads, regardless of their range. In a strict red build, Power of Fire is basically a poor man's fire breathing, but it's still very usable. For Arlinn builds, or even Nahiri builds that include the core hookers, the Kessigs, Elf Rangers, and the core hookers can all certainly make good use of Power of Fire. There's really not much to be said of this card. Additional power means you're killing your opponents faster. It's just a solid win. Number 2 of the Fantastic Four, Fire Breathing, 30-pointer from Arena of Planeswalkers. Getting +2 power against adjacent figures works for all of Red's squads because they are all range 1 anyway. They are never going to be attacking a non-adjacent enemy. If you're playing Arlinn, this card works very well for the Pulmaroot Elementals, and honestly you could even chuck it on the Elf Rangers if you want to send them in to duke it out, or even combine it with Overrun. No one expects the Elf Rangers to be rolling 7 attack dice with Trample, so there's some unique surprise factor here. And while I am talking about other colors, I would be remiss to not bring up the Rocks Veterans, who also have Trample and can seriously benefit from fire breathing. And saving the best for last, the Blazing Firecats especially appreciate fire breathing because it sincerely helps them to consistently meet the requirements for Intense Strike. This enchantment is extremely powerful if you can play it on a full squad and get all of their attacks off on the same turn. Do not underestimate this card. Red's second best spell in my opinion, Seize the Day, 10-pointer from Arena of Planeswalkers set. This is such a good card. Taking a move and attack with a creature can mount so much pressure in one turn, especially if you can combine it with Power of Fire, Fire Breathing, or Twin Flame. If you can activate a full squad and play one or two of these previously mentioned cards on that squad, take your normal move and attack with those creatures, and on that same turn play Seize the Day, you will likely inflict so much damage that your opponent might have a hard time bringing the game back. However, given Seize the Day's nature of only targeting one red squad creature, I think Seize the Day best combos with Twin Flame, which only targets a squad creature. Getting a double dip effect on Twin Flame's power is absolutely insane, and if you can use both of those attacks against your opponent's Planeswalker, you will likely destroy them. There are many ways to use this card creatively, I think. All this just to say, this 100% belongs in every red build that has a single red squad in it. And finally, no red card makes me hotter than this one, Twin Flame, 15-pointer from the first Arena of Planeswalkers set. I think this card is sincerely underpriced. It is potentially game-ending if you can force your opponent's Planeswalker to be on the receiving end of any Twin Flame buffed attacks. This is absolutely a top contender for the best spell in all AOTP. I scored this one above Seize the Day because Twin Flame only specifies a squad creature instead of a red squad creature like Seize the Day does. This makes it easier for Arlinn and Nahiri to buff their green and white creatures to astronomical power levels. The most broken thing I can think of is combining Twin Flame with Green's Titanic Growth on a double attacking Kessig Ranger. This combo at a base gets you the ability to roll 6 attack dice 2 times while doubling all of the crossed swords for each roll. I'm not going to go too deep into the math, but the gist of this combo is that you will roll an average of 6 hits per attack, and most Planeswalkers are only rolling 1 to 2 shields per defense. So if my logic is correct, you can generally expect to deal anywhere from 8 to 10 damage to the average Planeswalker with this combo. That is absolutely monstrous. Not a single Planeswalker will survive that. And as I mentioned with Seize the Day, the same logic pretty much carries for the Firecats. If you can start a fresh turn with them, enchant them with Fire Breathing, and use Twin Flame on one of them, and then move and attack, and get your Twin Flame boosted cat to attack the enemy Planeswalker, you can then follow up with Seize the Day to get an additional move and attack with that Twin Flame buffed Firecat. This gets you 5 attack dice with doubled hits rolled on 2 different attacks. These combos are game ending. I could probably gush praise for Twin Flame for days, but I hope you understand how powerful this card is. Alright, spells out of the way, now we're going to tackle Red's creatures. And unfortunately, this first one is a real doozy, just like Harness the Storm is the worst spell. Bloodline Nobles, 70 points from Shadows over Innistrad. The arrogant Silver Spoon Vampires are just the worst squad, in my opinion. I find nothing compelling about these guys. 2 life and 2 toughness is quite frail. In my experience, it doesn't take much to bring them down. They usually fall after 1 or 2 attacks. Their only ability in Arrogant Strike is, well, in ability. It feels certainly red-ish in that you can buff their power, and it has a good chance to enhance their power even further. However, I don't see Arrogant Strike working against most heroes or Planeswalkers, given those figures tend to have 4, 5, or even 6 power at base. And hilariously, for as much as I like to crap on Gideon, this is one squad that legitimately hates Gideon's Avatar of Justice due to how it helps Gideon to turn off their Arrogant Strike if all 3 of the nobles surround him and try to kill him. But hilarious fun fact aside, the nobles' very questionable survivability, in my opinion, does not make them very good candidates for enchantments. Although I'll freely admit that sometimes enchantments, especially reds, get all of the value they need from just 1 turn of launching attacks against key figures. In general, I would tend to buy the Eldrazi Scions over these guys. The Scions are cheaper at 55 points, they have 1 greater base move, and 1 greater base toughness over the Nobles. Although the Scions are missing some minor synergies because they aren't red, so if you are really clamoring for some synergies with red spells such as Seize the Day or Pyroclasm, you would have to choose the Bloodline Nobles. But in case all of this chatter hasn't made it clear, I think this is the worst squad in the game. Pass. Next on the chopping block, Flamewing Phoenixes, 35-pointer from the first Arena of Planeswalkers set. The Phoenixes have always been a sort of fan favorite of mine, although my love for them has been waning over time. They are pretty similar to the Restless Zombies in that they have 1 life and 1 toughness, and they can return to the battlefield from the graveyard. However, I'm more inclined to enchant the Phoenixes due to their higher movement and their ability to, mostly passively, respawn while they are still on the battlefield, thus they can maintain their enchantments. However, putting enchantments on them is pretty risky considering their really crummy life and toughness values. If I want to make use of power buffing enchantments with the Phoenix's range 1, they are often going to be in situations where they will have a high probability of being destroyed on the opponent's turn if I ever actually want to make use of their newfound power by sending them into combat. Their toughness can be upgraded via stubborn resilience when only one of them remains, and then you can rebirth more back over the coming turns, but also in a Nahiri build where white provides toughness enchantments like Marked for Honor or Divine Favor. However, using them with Nahiri means that you will likely have less space to fit red sorceries in your deck, which would allow these guys to rebirth. And so there's this fine balance of how many enchantments do you use versus how many red sorceries do you use if you want to maximize these guys, at least in a role of like a snowballing endgame unit. And so I've generally come to the conclusion that their best use seems to lie in either holding a glyph in some far off location where you can use their 6 move and flying, or to just summon them directly into engagement with some threatening enemy figure in a moment of dire need. Essentially use them as cannon fodder. And here's one more thing you need to consider. Rebirth asks you to place a Phoenix adjacent to your Planeswalker. This is detrimental when there are threats with trample in your game. For the most part, that boils down to green's Overrun spell, green's Pulmaru Elementals, who have trample, and white's Rock's Veterans, who have trample. Still, this causes red's armies, which contain the Phoenixes, to have trickier matchups against those colors when those figures are on the map. Getting into red's better creatures, Mad Prophet, 70 points from Shadows over Innistrad. The Mad Prophet is a hero/planeswalker fighter in a pretty unique 70-point package. Honestly, from a development perspective, I think he's well designed, even if his niche can feel a bit weak in squad-heavy games. Haste is almost always useful, and Insistent Ravings makes this surprise beast from the east ready to put some hurt on any bulky enemy figures that attempt to approach your Planeswalker while he is in your reserve. 6 life and 4 toughness nearly guarantees that this guy will hold his position for a reasonable amount of time. He's usually just an afterthought in most of my red builds, but he earns a lot more value if you ever happen upon one of those morally devoid heroes-only white armies. Now we have the Goblin Javelineers, 100-point squad from the Battle for Zendikar set. And I just gotta say, for these guys being red and small 3, they are astonishingly slow at 5 move. Frankly, I think these guys are almost completely outclassed by the Blazing Firecats as red's primary fighting force, but the Goblins are definitely passable. At the same 100-point cost, Goblins bring 1 more base power, 1 more base life, and their volatile Hedron Javelin, which unfortunately can only hit creatures and not Planeswalkers, which in my opinion knocks it down a little bit. And so, they lack haste, intense strike, 2 extra toughness, and 2 additional move, which the Firecats have. But I do want to say, as a big point in their favor, they can be used in a Nahiri army that also features the core Aeronaut Captain, because they can be carried via his air raid, and the Blazing Firecats do not have this option. And while this isn't super efficient, the core Aeronaut Captain at least helps them to bypass their terrible movement and small size, and it gives your opponent 2 monsters to deal with flying around the map instead of just 1 like a standard flying hero would. And now we have what I believe are red's strongest creatures, the Blazing Firecats, 100-pointer from Arena of the Planeswalkers. The Bernie Kitties are hard for me to pass up when it comes to considering any of my red builds. Haste and Intense Strike are nearly always threatening, if a little bit swingy due to their reliance on the attack dice. 7 move is damn good. 2 life and 4 toughness is slightly fragile, but tends to hold up well enough for them to get their work done in my experience. When the kitties get high ground and or any other kind of boost to their power, everything they touch will spontaneously combust, because Intense Strike's roll 2 get 1 free is more likely to kick in as the kitties get more attack dice. Being a double-spaced figure is definitely a double-edged sword. A Bernie Kitty could be summoned to engage/attack a figure that is up to 7 spaces away from your red Planeswalker, where a single space figure would only be able to do this from 6 spaces away. But the kitties can also be denied position or engagement or high ground by an opponent that positions carefully, because the cats do need to be on 2 same level spaces in order to launch their attack. All that aside, I think the Firecats are what a good red squad should look like. Alright, we've nearly burned through everything. Let's tackle red's 3 Planeswalkers. Up first is Chandra, 365 pointer from the first Arena of Planeswalkers set. Chandra, while somewhat unique, feels pretty average when it comes to the capacity to build winning armies containing her. Dual color Planeswalkers are cheaper than she is, and they have twice as many options to build their decks and armies with. Her range of 5 is unfortunate, if only because of how easy it is for an enemy Planeswalker to instantly place her in engagement with summoned creatures if Chandra decides to move in and attack an enemy Planeswalker while they have creatures in reserve. However, Chandra's Fury plus high ground equals tons of destruction via her double attack. But this is where my problems come in. Almost everything in red wants to be destroying stuff, and your Planeswalker is a figure you generally want to preserve or keep towards the back so that they can continue to cast spells and summon creatures throughout the game. So all of Chandra's offensive prowess is kind of in conflict with her role as a Planeswalker and her creatures' roles, because Red's creatures are generally frail and they want to be activated as often as they can so that they can be using their offensive abilities to be destroying the opponent. Luckily, red haste creatures are very threatening. As long as Chandra has the Firecats and or the Prophet in her summoning reserves, it is quite dangerous, especially for enemy Planeswalkers, to end their turn near her. And this is magnified when she is enchanted by Stoke the Flames. Also, her superheated power is not fantastic, but nice enough in case you need to finish off a creature that only has 1 life remaining. However, I think for most red spells, you want to play them for their effects and not overwrite the effects and turn them into deal 1 damage to a creature. So all in all, I think Chandra is a pretty average Planeswalker. Definitely not terrible, but I don't think she's top tier either. Next up, we have Nahiri. 345 points from the Shadows over Innistrad set. Nahiri generally wins or loses based on her ability to maintain her height advantage. She has a Bulwark, 7 life, 4 toughness, and near-death experience in white for healing. And luckily, because she has an ability like Lithomancy, where she can just drop tiles underneath her, this all ensures that she's basically one of the toughest Planeswalkers to kill. Her lowest range of 4 and her poor power of 3 aren't doing her many favors, especially when she can't maintain high ground. And on a hilly map with tons of elevation changes, I think she kind of struggles to maneuver with Pass-Through Stone. I find the combination of red and white really odd to use, because red is usually about high movement, high destruction, where white is usually more content to hang out and buff their toughness and get their healing going. But luckily, terribly slow white creatures can definitely appreciate things like Rush of Adrenaline or Sure Strike or Goblin Warpaint, like things that allow you to move your squad, which again, white needs anything to help their squads move because they have such terrible threat range. And I think red with Divine Favor or even Inspired Charge in tandem with things like the Flamewing Phoenixes or the Bloodline Nobles or especially the Blazing Firecats. This just makes red's already insanely high octane figures even more deadly. They're going to inflict some serious pain. If you think white supremacists are scary in real life, just wait until you see my fire-breathing, pro-human, white Inquisitor figures. I can guarantee you those figures would leave you with PTSD. And we have arrived at who I think is one of the strongest Planeswalkers in the game, Arlinn, 340 points from Shadows over Innistrad. The offensively destructive potential of the combination of red and green is insane. Nearly this fact alone makes Arlinn a top tier Planeswalker. I don't think Arlinn is particularly strong as a standalone figure. She's utterly frail at base 6 life and 3 toughness, and her base move is weak at 5. This is all slightly mitigated by what is available to her in both green, red, and her transform ability. She gets Bountiful Harvest, Arlinn Wolf having 4 toughness and 7 move, and she has access to 2 haste army cards in the Firecats and Mad Prophet, which help clear out nearby threats in a pickle, or apply additional instant offensive pressure in situations where she is aggressing. Speaking of Arlinn Wolf, her transform ability is quite fun and unique. You can play at 7 range with her Archmage's Assault ability to potentially deal true damage to a Planeswalker at the end of her turn, Or you can transform and play as Arlinn Wolf and go into melee range with her 5 power and Howl, which grants a +1 power counter to one of her unique squads on each turn where she deals combat damage. With her access to creatures like the Pummelroots, the Firecats, the Elf Rangers, and of course the mighty Kessigs, no opponent wants Howl triggering multiple times. When you use Titanic Growth plus Twin Flame plus the Kessig Ranger double attack, you will hear your opponent's tears and drink the lamentations of their birthing persons. Arlinn's access to Twin Flame and Titanic Growth at the same time allows her to threaten any Planeswalker if she can get even one squad figure near them. I think Arlinn's builds lie primarily in a mix of 2 playstyles. One, a true damage spam build, which uses things like Archmage's Assault, Elvish Blade Finesse, Circle of Flame, Pyroclasm, Incinerate, etc., all in an effort to assassinate an enemy Planeswalker very quickly. Or a Buckets of Attack dice build, which uses things like Howl, Overrun, Twin Flame, Fire Breathing, Titanic Growth, all permitting tons of attack dice to be tossed and using brute force to destroy everything. With everything available to Arlinn, I feel like it is very hard to defensively counter everything she can do. This is why I think she is one of the best, if not the best, Planeswalker. And we are at the tail end of the video. My closing thoughts on Red in AOTP. It is definitely the glass cannon built for pure destruction. Offense is their defense. Nearly everything in Red directly deals damage or accelerates your potential to destroy a figure. From true damage sorceries to power boosting enchantments, if you want something dead, you can depend on Red. As I mentioned, Arlinn may very well be the most powerful Planeswalker in AOTP, but I truly wonder if a blue-red dual-color Planeswalker could dethrone her. It's a shame an official release of that color combination did not happen. I do want to design a blue-red Planeswalker in the future as a custom, but that's a talk for another time. Thanks for watching the video. Please cast a spell on the like button and summon the subscribe button if you want more AOTP content. We'll see you in the next tier list video.